What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Packers are coming off a 17-10 loss to the Kansas City Chiefs in Kansas City in the third and final preseason game. The next time we have Packers football, it will actually be the regular season. Seems crazy after all of this time of going through the offseason, and will Aaron Rodgers be back, and Devante Adams, will he be traded, and all of it, and all of a sudden, we are getting closer and closer to the regular season, but it's not time to talk about regular season. Let's talk about this Packers-Chiefs game. Once again, I kind of talked about this last week as well. I thought this was mostly a nondescript game. I don't think there were any massive takeaways, but I'm going to go through. I had the opportunity to watch it twice. I watched it live, and then I went back and watched the condensed version on NFL Plus. NFL Plus, by the way, still terrible. Don't recommend it, but the one thing it is good for is the condensed version. So if you want a quick rewatch of the game, that is something that is really well done. And it usually is out like an hour and a half-ish after the game is done, even in the preseason, which is impressive. So that is the one thing that it is definitely useful for, and I really like that feature. Everything else is pretty much garbage with it, but that is the one nice thing. Anyway, let's get into this game. My first and biggest takeaway, how do I want to say this? The special teams still a major issue. And we can be real here, right? This is a preseason game. Not all the guys that will be playing in the regular season will be playing in preseason. And there will be guys that are in different positions because everything has a trickle-down effect, right? As some of the key guys playing consistently on special teams, then, some of the guys that are now playing in key roles will be in secondary roles and so on and so forth. So I don't think that this is the be-all, end-all. I don't think that this dooms Rich Bisaccia and the Packers special teams this upcoming season. But 3 games in, I know it's just preseason. I know I don't want to make too much. I don't want to be hyperbolic about it. I don't want to go overboard. But 3 games in, even if it's preseason, of the Rich Bisaccia special teams era, and it is still ugly, 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 ugly. And this game was probably, which is saying something, because the first 2 preseason games were really ugly in and of themselves from a special team standpoint. And this one was probably the worst. So a couple things. The fact that you're not seeing progression, and the fact that you're not seeing it get better over these games is concerning. The fact that we don't have much good to go off of. Yes, we had the Amari Rodgers kick return, the 50-yarder. That, to me, still looked like poor coverage on the opposing team's end more than it was anything that Green Bay did spectacularly. I just haven't seen anything yet that would make me go, okay, we're good here. Some of these things are going to be okay. When it comes to coaching, what I'm looking for, and I know they're not game planning, and I want to stress again, I know this is preseason, but I want to see if from an offensive standpoint, if you're an offensive coach, I want to see you get a 3 or 4 plays in a game that you scripted basically open based on what you saw in tendencies on tape. That you found a hole or something in the defensive game plan that you know that you can attack something and your team can go out and execute it. I want a handful of plays like that every single game where almost regardless of what players you have, you can execute those couple plays because you found something on tape that you could take advantage of. Defensively, same thing. I want a couple plays a game, a couple blitzes, a couple somethings that shows me that you found some flaw in their tape and you took advantage of it in a key moment. On special teams, I want the basics. I want you to be able to do the simple things. I don't want anything catastrophic. And same thing, I want at least one something per game that makes me go, okay, they saw something and they schemed something out and this is what they got out of it. And I know you're not game planning special teams in a preseason game, but man, the basics weren't there. They're not getting better. And I think this is a legitimate concern. And as I've talked about, this is probably going to be a more defensive Packers team than we've seen in some time. It's not to say that the offense can't put up points, but it could be a defensive-led team. And if you are a defensive-led team, you need to work hand in hand with special teams to make sure that your special teams is putting your defense in positive situations so that, the opposing offense has to go the full length of the field, and you're not getting giving the other team the ball in plus territory or making it so that they don't have to go the full length of the field. And I get that matters if you're a good defense or bad defense, and it all matters, but if you are going to win games with a defensive mentality, then you can't be giving up points or yardage or anything else in a special teams capacity. And this game, just look at some of the plays in this game. And I don't mean to start off negative. There were some real positives that we'll get to in this game as well. But this was clearly, to me, the biggest takeaway. Opening kick return. The opening kick return, you forgot to block the first guy down the field. You forgot to block him. It was a terrible kick return. And even Amari Rodgers broke a tackle on the play. And even after that, there was nothing there. Your first punt had a 35-yard punt return. Your next kick return, you made it to the 16-yard line. The third kick return was only 19 yards. You allowed a 46-yard kick return to start the second half. Tyler Goodson had a kick return to the 4-yard line. You had a holding penalty on a punt return that even with the holding penalty went a grand total of 0 yards. Here were the stats on the day. From a punt return standpoint, the Chiefs punted the ball 5 times. 5 times. The Packers had 1 punt return for 0 yards and had a holding penalty on the play. The Chiefs, meanwhile, had 6 punt returns for 118 yards, almost 20 yards a return. That is horrible. All right, how about kick returns? Packers had 4 kick returns for 56 yards. They couldn't average 15 yards a kick return. Meanwhile, the Chiefs had 2 kick returns for 62 yards. They had 2 less returns and had 6 more yards. That is how bad this special teams was. So, listen, I get, and I want to say it again, I get that we have not seen the special teams at its full capacity, and this very well could work itself out. Well, just putting some better players out on the field once the regular season starts. But let's just say, and be real about it, the fact that we haven't seen really much of anything or any improvement and still some really ridiculous mistakes over 3 preseason games doesn't lend a ton of confidence to the current state of special teams, despite having Rich Bisaccia as one of the highest paid, if not the highest paid special teams coordinator in the league, bringing in 2 special teams assistants, bringing in guys that are specifically here for special teams. So far, the results haven't been there. So we'll see what happens when we transition over to the regular season, but it has been a rough 3 preseason games for this Packers special teams. All right, let's get into more good news. I can probably bet you that you're not going to guess the first player in this game that I'm going to talk about, yet I am very much geeked up about it. We're going to start by talking about Kway Walker, maybe the most forgotten man in this entire Packers roster. 7th round pick, who many thought, the Packers got an absolute steal by picking him up in the 7th round, and has not really been able to do anything up until this point. He just recently started doing team activities. Remember, he had the injuries at the start of training camp. He was sort of in the rehab group, and then finally got to do some individual stuff. And then finally this past week got to do team drills. Didn't play in either of the first 2 preseason games. And Caleb Jones, meanwhile, is having a good camp, and Zach Tom's having a good camp, and so on and so forth. And I think everyone just got to a point where all right, guy hasn't played, guy's barely practiced. He was a end of the 7th round pick. They're just going to cut him and probably bring him back to the practice squad and sort of just forgot about him. And it's understandable, right? If out of sight, out of mind. But this was our first chance to see Kway Walker. And it was sort of an all-in moment for him because he had no other real opportunity in joint practices or in preseason games or anything, family night, etc., to go out and prove himself. He got 1 game. He got 1 game to go out and prove himself and say hey, I'm at least going to give you something to think about as you're making your 53-man roster decisions. You drafted me with a 7th round pick. Maybe there's another team that realizes that they made a mistake by letting me slip to the 7th round, and maybe I'm going to get claimed. So if you want to keep me, you better keep me. And he had 1 opportunity to go out and make the Packers think about it. Because let's say if he went out and had a terrible game and put nothing on tape, every other team is just going to be whatever. They'll forget about him, right? This was a good enough game from Kway Walker that if I were another team, I would very much consider claiming him. And if I were the Green Bay Packers, I would very much consider putting him on the 53-man roster, even ahead of Caleb Jones, who's had a very nice camp and has put together a resume worthy of a potential 53-man roster spot. I'm keeping Kway Walker based on this. Balance, hand usage, staying between his man, mirroring defenders. I thought he had a near flawless game. The only hiccup whatsoever was a screen pass that was going to the left, and he's sort of letting his guy get in, because as an offensive lineman, you want to let your guys get upfield, but not get to the quarterback. Well, Danny Etling's in at this point, and there's a screen to the left, and Etling had the opportunity to get rid of the ball, and basically he's doing his job, right? Rasheed Walker's doing his job, kind of letting the defender in a little bit, and all of a sudden, like, Etling like sort of reverses and sort of just dances around a little bit, doesn't hit the screen, and like Rasheed Walker's expected the ball like long gone at this point, and like all of a sudden, like the defender disengages and gets Danny Etling down, and you could even see Rasheed Walker like almost like mimic of like, well, why do you still have the ball? Like, what the heck just happened? Because the ball should have been long gone by then. So I would put that on Etling. I would not put that on Rasheed Walker. That was the only minor blemish, in my opinion. I thought he was fantastic. I thought he was good in the run game. I thought he was good in the pass game. And it was a really, really sound and strong performance. And I was blown away by what he was able to do. Second and third stringers, a lot of what he was going against, he wasn't in there with the first team or anything like that. So still take it with some grain of salt. But man, I thought, like I said, if you're not putting that sack on him, which I don't, a near flawless performance from Rasheed Walker. I'm not saying like he couldn't have done things better. I'm not putting it in that capacity, but like if you watch his defenders go up against him, he consistently stayed between his defender and the running backs in the run game. He consistently stayed between his defender and the quarterback in the passing game. And there were multiple times where like the edge defenders are like trying something against him and just end up with like their back to him. And like, he's just like, he was almost like at times almost looked like he was on like cruise control. It was very impressive. And, clearly it's one game. And this is a 7th round pick, and I don't want you to believe like all of a sudden they've got like this steal and he could be like this starting tackle this year. I'm not saying that, but for one performance and getting one game and not having a ton of team reps and those sort of things, I thought that was as good of a performance as you could possibly expect. And it is noteworthy, he did get in the game before Caleb Jones, and I'm sure because Caleb Jones has played in other preseason games and Walker hasn't, that they just wanted to get him a ton of time so that they could make an evaluation on him. But he was in there first, and he played very, very well. So that was honestly one of my biggest takeaways, especially as I went through and watched it the second time. It's funny, I had all my notes from my first time watching the game and then went through and rewatched everything and tried to pick out and like rewound and things like that I could take away. All the stuff was the exact same on my first go around. The only thing additional is I got to watch a little bit more of Rasheed Walker. In my initial notes, I thought he played well. In my rewatching it, I'm like, man, he really, really had a great game. So was super geeked up about that. Let's talk about the other Walker. Let's talk about Kway Walker, the first round pick. I thought he had a really nice start to this game, had 5 tackles before getting taken out of the game very early. They did count the tackle on the play where he got to the receiver right away, or tight end, whoever it was, and sort of missed the tackle on the play, and then Keyshawn Nixon came back and sort of cleaned it up. I would have counted that as probably a missed tackle for Kway Walker, but still held up the offensive player long enough for everyone else to sort of rally to the football, and in this case, Keyshawn Nixon make the actual tackle. But I think we saw, and this is the first time I think Packer fans, not in practice, really got the opportunity to really see some of his burst and explosiveness. There was the play he got out to the sideline. He diagnosed it quick. He exploded to the sideline and then had a little bit of pop when he was making that tackle. And as Matt LaFleur mentioned after the game, he is far from a finished product, but you can see him making progress and you can see him flowing to the football better. I thought this was his best game of the 3. Still a lot of things to work on. But I thought that you could see the raw athleticism and what he has the potential to bring to the table. Listen, inside linebacker is a tough spot, and he has a lot to learn. But Matt LaFleur, I know, was impressed in his postgame presser, and I thought this was an impressive performance, at least a step in the right direction for Kway Walker. He's going to play a lot of snaps this season. There are going to be growing pains, but there's going to be some flash plays as well. I think we saw what some of those flash plays could look like, at least in getting to the sidelines and making plays, something he's done pretty consistently in training camp. Now let's talk about that running back battle. It's interesting because I think we're clearly going to remember that 24-yard-ish touchdown run by Tyler Goodson is probably one of the plays of the game, if not the play of the game for the Packers. And I think you look back at it and you're like, yeah, Tyler Goodson really showed out. I was shocked as I look back at the box score to see the difference between Tyler Goodson and Taylor. They both had 7 carries. Goodson only 28 yards, Taylor 34 yards. Goodson had 5 catches for 26 yards. Taylor had 3 for 17. So Goodson had 12 total touches for 54 yards. Meanwhile, Taylor had 10 for 51. So he only had 3 less yards and only had 2 less touches. So you look at it, and Taylor actually had the slightly more efficient day. Now, what opportunities they had and things like that, you can make, debate. And Goodson clearly had like the play of the day on that touchdown run. But Taylor at the end of the day, had a pretty good game and was right there with Goodson from a productivity standpoint, and is even probably a little bit more efficient. So, Matt LaFleur, Brian Gutekunst have talked about what they're looking for in this number 3 battle is pass protection and special teams. Well, pass protection, Tyler Goodson had a pass pro rep where Leo Chanel basically sent him to the Netherlands. Like, not Netherlands, like the netherworld, whatever you want, the upside down, whatever you want to call it. He blew the heck up out of Tyler Goodson. Now, Tyler Goodson got in front of the man and gave Love just enough time to throw the football, but Chanel completely blew up Goodson on the play, and Goodson had the kick return, wasn't aware that it was still in the end zone so that he could just take a knee and get the ball at the 25-yard line. Instead, tries to take it out and gets to the 4-yard line. Special teams was not great for Tyler Goodson. Pass pro was not great for Tyler Goodson. And at the end of the day, they ran pretty similarly. In fact, Taylor was a bit more efficient and is the better pass protector, is the better special teams player. So I like Goodson. I think there's still a very decent chance that he makes the team. But I think as we were watching this game, it felt like, okay, this is a Tyler Goodson coming out party, the big touchdown run. Like, he's got to be the number 3. He still has a lot to work on. I still am liking my 2 running back theory that I've been preaching for way too many episodes now. But, it's still a good game for both running backs, and I think they both put enough on tape that at least make you consider keeping either of them for the 53-man roster. Part of that is why I think they may go with just 2, is because I think they might release both, feel like they get both back, and even if they don't, they're probably pretty certain they're going to get at least one of them back, and Kylan Hill comes back in a month anyway, so, or at least could come back in a month. So we'll see what happens there, but I thought both of them had nice games. Speaking of that Tyler Goodson touchdown run, I thought Josh Myers just did a phenomenal job getting out in front, basically throwing a guy to the ground and really springing Tyler Goodson on that play. Josh Myers has had a good preseason. If there's any offensive lineman that looks like they maybe took a little bit of a jump, I think it's Josh Myers, and I'm really, really excited to see what he can do as the full-time center. I'm hoping he can stay healthy for the entirety of the year and really see what he can do. If he can get as good as I think he can get, there's a lot of upside there. And I think he, along with, Bakhtiari and Elton Jenkins and John Runyon Jr., can be the 4 guys that really make this offensive line tick. And then they've got some really interesting options at that other 5th spot, depending on what way they want to go. One player who I thought struggled in this game and has sort of had a rough camp and a rough preseason is Devante Wyatt. Now, it was better on second watch than I thought in the first watch. He had the spin move, which was great. He had another pressure early where they just got rid of the ball quickly. And there were a couple plays where he kind of got into the backfield a little bit, but man, he is playing way too high. He is losing the leverage battle, and you watch him and he's just getting pushed back way too often and way too far. There's a play where he's back 7 yards, off the line of scrimmage, and it was just a one-on-one block. And he did have to try to eat some, double teams, and that didn't go great either, but he just has to play with much better pad level, win them with leverage, stay lower, and, not just try to, get into the backfield. The technique is very far off. He's got a long way to go. And that's a little bit, I think, disappointing for a 24-year-old defensive lineman that's coming into the league and played at the University of Georgia. And I think there was some thought that he'd be able to maybe help the team sooner rather than later. That hasn't looked like the case so far. You never know when these things are going to click for players. When he does get moving, you can see all the special traits, right? Big guy, fast mover, can shoot gaps. I think there's going to be a way to utilize him this season, and I think he's going to continue to get better. But he has he's going to need some time. Let's just put it that way. And right now, he just really, really has to hone in and work on his technique a little bit more. All right, let's talk about Jordan Love. Interesting game from Love, 16 to 26, 148, 0 touchdowns, 1 pick. Aaron Rodgers was complimentary of Love in his sideline, conference or sideline interview. And then Matt LaFleur was complimentary in the postgame presser. I thought early on there just wasn't much there for Love. I don't think there was anything he could have done. It was him and the second team, some third team players against a lot of the Chiefs starters. That's a tough ask for a quarterback. And then, I thought as the game went on, he started to settle down. I thought he hit some throws in the middle of the game and then, cooled off at times and got a little bit out of rhythm on some things. But there were 2 plays that he would love to have back. I thought the first one was that cover 2 play where he throws kind of a back shoulder on a cover 2. We don't know the receiver, route here, what the receivers were supposed to do. On the play, it looked to me like this is a cover 2, a cover 2 play where, he's trying to get the ball inside that window, or a back shoulder, it's confounding no matter what, because what it looked like on live and what it looked like on review is that he was trying to hit a back shoulder on a cover 2, which is a big no-no. That can't happen, because the corner is going to sit underneath it. The corner is not running with the wide receiver. The corner is going to sit underneath it. So if anyone's going to get that ball, it's the corner. If he's trying to hit the turkey hole and he's trying to hit that shot in between the corner and the safety, A, it's still a bad read because it wasn't there. And B, he was way behind, trying to hit the turkey hole. He hit the corner, the underneath corner in the hands. So he either completely misread the play and was trying to throw a back shoulder on a cover 2 and thought it was man or something, or he tried to hit the turkey hole and just completely missed it and still misread it because it wasn't open. So that's a bit concerning. Maybe the wide receiver did something wrong and it's not his fault. Could be the case. It wouldn't be the first time, but it looked like a tough read for Jordan Love and a bad decision on that play. The play that actually got picked off, that one should have been picked, easily picked. That was a bad play. The other interception, still a bad play. I'm a bit with Matt LaFleur on this. When I first watched it, I'm like, man, it's just an awful decision, right? I think time and down and distance and some of those things played a little bit of a factor here, but they rotated into a cover 2. And what we know about cover 2, so cover 2, safety, right? They're shooting off into their half of the field zones, right? And then if you're running a seam with the tight end, it's up to the inside linebacker to run with them up the seam. So the safeties are out wide, the tight end is up the seam, and if you can up and down over the linebacker and the tight end has a step on the play, you have an opportunity to get a huge play. And it's really the inside linebacker's job to cover that up. So he sees them rotate late. They rotated late into a cover 2. He sees it, realizes that Mac's running up the seam, and takes that shot. I don't hate the thought process there for why he went there initially. However, I will say this. And maybe the wide receivers on the outside did something wrong again, who knows. But with no vertical routes on the outside, both receivers cut off their routes, there's nothing to threaten the safeties out wide. So maybe it's just a poor design, or maybe it was poor routes on the outside, or maybe Love just can't go there. The fact that Matt LaFleur said he didn't mind the decision and live thought that's where he would have gone with the ball as well leads me to believe that there was something going on there. But what I didn't like is that a couple things. There's no routes to the outside, so I would love it's just going to lead the safeties back inside, especially as you bring your eyes back over. Those safeties are going to migrate inside because they have nothing else to do on the far outsides. There's no receivers threatening deep on the outside, so they're just going to slowly make their way down and in. And that's exactly what happened. Is they made their way in, and the safety ranges over and picks off the ball. The other thing is Matt LaFleur said Mac had a step on the play. I think that's a little bit generous. I thought maybe he had a quarter of a step at best. It would have been a really tight throw. And I think just based on the read of not having anyone outside and the safeties have nobody to keep honest on the outside and can roam back in, I thought and then with Mac not having a ton of separation, I think that's a play where even if that's the initial right read, cover 2, seam up the middle, I think you just got to live to see another down. And even if it's 4th down or try to hit something underneath or go off script, do something different, because I just don't think the opportunity was there to succeed. But as far as I think a lot of people were oh, that's an egregious, awful, brutal play. I don't think it wasn't as bad as I quite thought, because it was a cover 2 with a tight end on a running, or a tight end and a linebacker. And that's where you're usually going to go in a cover 2, is a seam route with a tight end on a linebacker and no safeties over the top. Just so happened that the safeties had nothing else to do, so they're over the top. And maybe he could have known that. Maybe he didn't. Maybe the wide receivers cut it off and they shouldn't have. Who knows? But it was a little less egregious than when I initially watched it. All right, I thought Amari Rodgers had a very nice game. Kick return on the broken tackle at the very beginning. There's nothing he could have done with that to make it any better. He did everything he could, broke a tackle, got upfield. There was just 3 more guys waiting for him. They used him as a running back a little bit, which he's been doing in practice, and I thought he looked pretty good doing that. had a catch over the middle on third down, ended up with 4 catches for 39 yards, 3 rushes for 17 yards, and a 12-yard kick return. Not the most dynamic day in the world, but I thought he did some really nice things and stood out. Samori Toure tried to make a name for him, for himself. 6 catches, 83 yards on 8 targets, had a couple contested catches, and I thought he had a really nice day overall. And then Juwan Winfrey, Aaron Rodgers on the sidelines in his, little report on the sidelines, their interview on the sidelines, like he mentioned Winfrey again and how much he really likes him. So like Rodgers really likes Winfrey. He had 6 targets on the day, 1 catch, 7 yards. Not all his fault. He came back to the ball well on the 1 catch. He did some really good blocking on the outside as well. But not the best day overall from Winfrey when it comes. 6 targets and you end up with 1 catch for 7 yards is far, far, far less than ideal. But he does do a good job blocking. And again, I don't think everything was all his fault either. Another player who really stood out, Jack Heflin, had the tackle for loss on 4th down, had the forced fumble, had 5 tackles on the day. I don't know what more Jack Heflin could do. I don't know that he's going to make the team, but I think he's done everything in his power to say like, hey, watch what I'm doing. I'm eating blocks at the line of scrimmage. I'm looking more spry than I ever have in my life. You can be a trash can full of dirt, but like most trash cans full of dirt can't move the way he moved on that 4th down stuff. So that was a heck of a play by him and a really nice day overall. Let's talk very quickly about that touchdown by the Chiefs where Rico Gafford and Tariq Carpenter, so it was, to the tight end Bushman on the deep corner route, and there was some confusion. I read this as I went back and watched it on numerous occasions. To me, and I could very easily be wrong here, but I read it as everyone was running cover 6 except for Rico Gafford. And whenever there's a blown coverage, it's a little bit tough to tell because it could sort of throw everything else off. But what really leads me to believe that Gafford was the one that was wrong on the play is because the 2 people nearest to him both were expecting Gafford to do something else. Because Carpenter was playing the middle third of the field, and that would have made you believe, and the other safety was too, was playing the deep half. So, in a cover 6, not to get nerdy, but one safety is taking half the field, one safety's playing in corners, and then one corner crashes back in quarters coverage as well. So that's why it's a cover 6. You have a quarters, which is 4, and then 2 cover 2, which is basically a cover 2 and a cover 4 combined, so they call it a cover 6. Anyway, everyone else is playing a cover 6. The far corner is playing a cover 2, which is part of the cover 6. The safety on the far side is playing half the field. The Carpenter's playing a fourth of it, which is the cover 4. And then it looks like Gafford's supposed to play a cover 4 for a cover 6. All the 2 linebackers are both playing cover 6 coverage. The fact that the outside linebacker shot out in the flat, which would be cover 6 coverage. Like everything leads me to believe that it was cover 6 with Gafford supposed to get back and he didn't get back. Like he thought it was cover 2. Could be wrong. It could have been a cover 2 and Carpenter was running a cover 3 instead of a cover 2 and Gafford was supposed to come down and Garvin was supposed to like do something different. But if it was a cover 2, then in that case, Gafford would be right and Carpenter was wrong and Garvin was wrong. And it just seemed to me like everyone else was playing it as a cover 6. So you never quite know for sure. But if I were a betting man, I would say that was likely on Rico Gafford. A couple other quick notes. We had some injuries on the day. Ennis Gaines, Alize Mack, and Nate Becker all left with some sort of injury. So we'll have to kind of keep an eye on those. And while it is just preseason and it doesn't mean anything, I thought the officiating was very brutal. The Micah Abernathy almost pick was offensive pass interference for days, and how they missed that, I have no idea. The roughing the kicker penalty that they called running into the kicker was the definition of roughing the kicker. That was brutal. And then a couple defensive pass interference penalties that could have, I thought, gone against the Chiefs. It's just preseason. It doesn't matter. And let's hopefully that Green Bay gets the bad, breaks, in the officiating in the preseason game and not in the regular season or postseason. But there was some rough officiating. I thought that game could have went a little bit different if it was officiated a little bit differently, but who cares? It doesn't really matter. And thankfully it's just preseason because you don't have to complain about the officiating quite as much. I guess it's preseason for them too. All right, I think that covers everything. Lots to go over, but we will now get into some more 53-man roster stuff and see how Brian Gutekunst really finalizes this team. Packers are going to have a couple practices prior to making those decisions, so don't expect anything super soon. They could get rid of maybe a couple guys, so it could allow them to claim some players. We'll have to wait and see. But overall, he's going to have to make quite a few tough decisions. There's probably 10, maybe even more guys that I could go 50-50 with whether or not they make the team or not. So should be a very interesting few days. Of course, I'll be covering it here on the Pack a Day podcast as I do 365 days a year. So make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.